Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 290, Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez, we saw one of the craziest UFC fight cards in recent memory. And on this card, we saw some amazing performances. We saw some crazy knockout finishes, but we also saw some horrible performances and some terrible losses by certain fighters on the card. And I am going to give you my opinion on who needs to be cut from the UFC after their performance at UFC 290. Now, before I get into my list, this is not about me wishing anybody to lose their job. This is more about the barrier of entry of who belongs in the UFC. And the UFC barrier of entry has declined significantly over the past 5 to 6 years. And this is about fighters who are on the decline, who are on the downslope, and just outright do not belong in the UFC. Now, I'm going to start off with some honorable mentions, and then I'm going to get into my list, and I'm going to save who I believe needs to be cut from the UFC most for last on the list. Starting off with my first honorable mention, and that is Terrence Mitchell. If you're not super familiar with who that is, he made his UFC debut at UFC 290, and that's kind of why I'm giving him a pass. That's why he's not on the actual list. But Terrence Mitchell got absolutely wrecked by Cameron Simon. Terrence Mitchell was just unable to do anything. Got a takedown, but basically Simon immediately scrambled out of it, almost got a guillotine off the takedown, ended up back on their feet. Simon ends up getting him back to the ground, ends up getting his back, flattening him out, and beating him up. I don't know if Terrence Mitchell landed one strike in this fight. And, you know, it was a tough ask for him because he was stepping in on a week's notice, and he is coming from another promotion, and he's taking on a kind of hot prospect of Cameron Simon in the bantamweight division. But I just don't think this guy really belongs in the UFC. He's 33 years old. He has a record of 14-3, but look at the level of competition he's fought in the Alaskan promotion. The last guy he fought before this, 4-1. The guy before that, 4-2. The guy before that, 3-3. The guy before that, 1-2. So this is a guy who's not really fighting top-level competition. He's kind of got a padded record as it is. And, you know, the way he performed against Cameron Simon, it is clear that he is very, very low level. I do want to give him another opportunity because he did step in on short notice to fight a guy like Cameron Simon, and that's no easy task. So I think the UFC will give him one more fight. I think he does deserve to get one more fight just for stepping in on short notice, but I don't think this guy's going to make it. He's 33 years old in the bantamweight division. That is crazy stacked. There's guys outside the top 15 who I consider elite. I don't think it's going to last very long, but I think Terrence Mitchell is on the verge of being cut by the UFC. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is Marcin Prachnio. Marcin Prachnio lost to Vitor Petrino via submission arm triangle in the third round. And really, I mean, this was the worst fight on the card. I mean, was there a worse fight on the card? I don't think there was. And Prachnio really did nothing in this fight. He got outstruck, he got outgrappled. He had some moments with his kicks, but he had nothing to offer off of his back. He's lost 2 out of his last 3. He's, 34 years old at this point in time. He's 16-7, not the greatest record. And, you look at his last fight before that, he beat William Knight, but what a performance William Knight put on that night. He didn't throw any strikes. He just stood there like a heavy bag, basically. So I think Marcin Prachnio, he's knocking on the door because I don't even think Vitor Petrino is all that good. Vitor Petrino was just taking him down and holding him down, and Prachnio had no grappling. At this point in your career, at 34 years old, you still haven't developed your grappling at this point. And, I get it. He's only on a 1-fight losing streak. I know people laugh when I say that, but he's only lost 1 fight. He's only on a 1-fight losing skid, however you want to call it. But, he's losing to Felipe Lins. Felipe Lins is okay. Don't get me wrong. He's coming off a win right now. But the win over William Knight, super unimpressive. The performance against Vitor Petrino was super unimpressive because Petrino didn't even look that impressive. So you just have the inability to stuff a takedown. You have the inability to get up off your back. And basically, you're a super one-dimensional fighter who can just throw kicks. That's it. So I think if he loses one more fight, that's why he's an honorable mention. Maybe give him one more fight. But if he loses one more fight, I think it's time for the UFC to cut Marcin Prachnio. Moving on to my actual list, starting off with Nico Price. He was almost on the honorable mentions, but honestly, he really does deserve to be on the list. Nico Price got brutally KO'd by Robbie Lawler in the first round. I think it was 38 seconds into the first round. And honestly, I wanted to give him a pass. He gave Robbie Lawler his fairy tale ending, But Nico Price, I mean, he is on the decline. And he looks like, I don't know if anyone else is noticing this, he is looking old compared to what he once looked like. And he's really not all that old. He's 33 years old. I think Robbie Lawler literally looked like the younger fighter in this fight. And that is crazy to me. And I'm not talking about their performance itself, which, I mean, you could pick apart the performance. I'm just talking about just visually. If you just look at him, Nico Price looks old, and he's been around for a while. You know, he's 33 years old, and look at his last 5 fights. He's lost 4 out of his last 5. He got KO'd by Robbie Lawler. He got KO'd by Phil Rowe. The fight before that, he beat Alex Oliveira. The fight before that, he lost to Michel Pereira. He got, a doctor stoppage loss against Vicente Luque, losing 4 out of your last 5. I mean, and literally 5 out of his last 7. He's lost 5 out of his last 7. I mean, when's the last time he's won 2 fights in a row? We're looking all the way back in 2018 since he's won 2 fights in a row. And Robbie Lawler is on the massive decline. That's why he's retiring. He's 41 years old. And for Robbie Lawler, who I absolutely love, one of my favorite fighters of all time, to go out there and start you that bad, I think it might be time to hang it up. I mean, he's been stopped 5 times by KO or TKO of his 7 losses. Nico Price looks like he's slowed down. The cardio doesn't look like, as good as it once did. The speed doesn't look like it once did. And he's just taking a lot of damage. And where's he going? Where's he going in the welterweight division? He's going absolutely nowhere. So while I do love that he gave Robbie Lawler that fairy tale ending, just watching him drop, like he literally pulled the Court McGee, where Court McGee just fell and laid down like he was unconscious. But Nico Price really was just out cold. I mean, the way his body fell, I don't want to see that anymore. He's getting up there in age. I don't know if he would go to another organization or not. And I feel bad because these guys, I mean, this is how they make their money, but at what point is enough enough? I mean, he's been finished so many times. He gets brutalized by Robbie Lawler. He's slowing down. He has no future in the welterweight division. He's been around forever. How long has he been in the UFC at this point? He's been in the UFC since 2016, 7 years. That's a good run. But he's just not winning fights against even lower level welterweights. The welterweight division is nasty. So I think Nico Price, it's probably time for the UFC to cut Nico Price, even though I loved, and I'm going to say this a million times, I love the ending for Robbie Lawler. Fairy tale ending for Robbie Lawler. Unfortunate ending for Nico Price. I think it's time for the UFC to cut ties with Nico Price. Moving up on my list, the next fighter I believe needs to be cut from the UFC is Shannon Ross. Shannon Ross got brutally KO'd in the first round against Jesus Aguilar, and this was a nasty overhand right. It was a 17-second KO, slept badly, and now he's been finished in all of his last 3 fights. He got finished by Cledson Rodriguez. He got finished by Vinicius Salvador. He hasn't won a fight since November of 2020. Before that, outside the UFC, he got finished in his last fight outside the UFC. Before that win, he has never won a fight in the UFC. So he's won 1 out of his last 5, and the 4 losses are all by stoppage, and he gets slept badly. Oh my, it was a horrible knockout. And then you add on top of it, he's 34 years old. 34 years old, 13-8, getting stopped nonstop. The chin is deteriorating. The skill is not there. I mean, what are we keeping him around for? What are we truly keeping him around for? I really don't know. And especially in the flyweight division. What's he going to do in the flyweight division? You know what Manel Kape would do this guy? And I know I'm going way up the rankings, but I'm just saying, Shannon Ross can't even beat guys way outside the rankings. Jesus Aguilar has T-Rex arms, and he got slept by Jesus Aguilar in the first 20 seconds of the fight. It's not going to end well for him. Shannon Ross, I don't know where he goes from here. I mean, it's just guys like this do not belong in the UFC. When you're getting slept every other fight, and I just hate to see him take this amount of brain damage. I mean, 3 straight losses all by finish. To get put out cold that early in the fight and that badly just to be stiffened up by a right hand of Jesus Aguilar just shows me, I mean, that's 3 in a row now. You have no future in the flyweight division. You have no future in the UFC. You're 34 years old. Maybe at least he can go outside the UFC and have some competitive fights where he's not getting stiffened up every single fight. Because, I mean, that's not good for his brain. I mean, in the last 3 fights, he's gotten destroyed. And I just think it's time for the UFC to part ways with Shannon Ross. Moving up on my list of cuts from UFC 290, last on the list, you probably would have guessed this if you watch my videos or any of the streams, that is Jimmy Crute. Now, Jimmy Crute may very well retire. He's 27 years old. I find it hard to believe that he's actually going to retire. He took his gloves off in the cage, kind of put them down, but I don't think he's actually going to retire. So I think it's time for Jimmy Crute to go elsewhere outside the UFC because he just looks horrible. I mean, he got submitted in the second round against Alonzo Menifield, and that doesn't sound like, oh, he's not taking all that much damage. He got submitted. He was getting blasted by Alonzo Menifield in this fight, and he just has no head movement. He has no footwork. The way he moves is not the same way he used to move back in 2020. He looks awkward. He looks uncoordinated, and I think that's from taking so much damage over the last few years. And even in the last fight at UFC 284 against Alonzo Menifield, he got smashed. And the only reason it was a draw was because Menifield grabbed the fence in the third round, resulting in a point deduction. So he took a lot of damage there. Then the fight before that, he got brutally KO'd by Jamal Hill. And I just think Jimmy Crute, maybe he can go outside the UFC and rebuild. But bare minimum, at least outside the UFC, he'll be fighting lower level skilled fighters. So there, maybe he can get a win or maybe he can have a competitive fight. Because right now, against anybody in the top 15, I think Jimmy Crute's getting absolutely destroyed because I don't even think Alonzo Menifield's that good. And he's eating nasty power shots from Menifield over and over and over again with no head movement. So he's on a 3-fight losing streak. I know technically he has the draw in there, but he's essentially on a 3-fight losing streak, getting stopped by Alonzo Menifield, losing to Alonzo Menifield in what should have been a decision loss where he took a lot of damage, getting KO'd by Jamal Hill, and even against Anthony Smith back at UFC 261, it was a doctor stoppage. Now this, he didn't take as much damage, but he got his leg kicked off and he hit the nerve and he was unable to walk. But thank God that got stopped by the doctor. A lot of people complained about that. It's just a nerve thing. It'll come back. But dude, he would just resulted in more brain damage for Jimmy Crute, which I do not want to see at all. And honestly, at this point, his last wins in 2020 against Modestas Bukauskas. Modestas Bukauskas went on to lose more fights, get cut from the UFC, come back and win fights. That's how long it's been since Jimmy Crute had a win. And, you know, I know he's only 27, so I don't believe he's retiring. But, you know, at one point, people had high hopes for him. They thought he was a prospect in the light heavyweight division. The light heavyweight division is one of the least skilled divisions in the UFC. I think the higher the weight class gets, the divisions kind of fall off in terms of skill set outside of the upper echelon of the division. And I just don't think Jimmy Crute has any future in the division right now. He has to improve rapidly and quickly and just substantially. So bare minimum, if Jimmy Crute gets another fight, he better pray the UFC gives him some sort of trash can and he needs to switch training camps. I'm not even sure who he's training with, but it's not good because the striking doesn't look good. The striking doesn't look like it's improved at all over the last few years. The head movement's non-existent. He looked in better shape for this second fight at UFC 290, but it just didn't help him at all. It didn't help him at all. He was still eating big shots from Menifield and then eventually gets finished by Menifield. So I really think the UFC needs to cut Jimmy Crute, but maybe he does retire. Maybe he pursues another career. But ultimately, on this list, I think all my cuts on the actual list will probably happen by the UFC. They might give Nico Price one more shot, but I think they will cut Shannon Ross, and I think they will cut Jimmy Crute. They might just give Nico Price another shot just because he's been an absolute warrior and he's fought these wild, crazy fights and gave great performances. But outside of that, I think the other two guys are getting cut, and I think there's a chance Marcin Prachnio gets cut as well. We'll see. A lot of these cuts that I do in these videos do end up coming to fruition, but let me know what you guys think about my list down in the comments. Is there anyone I missed? Obviously, I'm not going through the whole card and telling you every single person that I would cut, but let me know down in the comments who I missed. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.